Imagine being a part of a community who struggles on a daily basis to easily communicate with the world around you. Imagine having the physical ability to speak, but never knowing how to, much less knowing what you sound like. This is a struggle faced daily by members of the deaf community. In order to help decrease the difficulty of the situation for members of the deaf community, I'm going to explain to you how we could decrease that issue. The best way to decrease difficulty for the deaf community and to help that community feel more included is to implement American Sign Language courses in all public schools. In today's society, many people are affected in some way by the use of American Sign Language, but are still clueless as to how to use it. Implementing American Sign Language courses in schools could decrease this issue. There are many points we could discover while discussing American Sign Language courses being implemented in schools, but today I'll discuss three main points. First, we will discuss the need this country has for American Sign Language. Next, we will discuss how American Sign Language classes are already somewhat included in schooling and why we should continue to increase those opportunities. And finally, we'll discuss how teaching American Sign Language could impact positively the workforce. Now that I've told you what points we'll be covering today, let's get on to the first point. In today's society, there's an obvious need for American Sign Language. According to Michelle J., who has a bachelor's degree in deaf studies with an emphasis in teaching, and who also writes for the Start ASL website, a website designed for teaching American Sign Language to people, American Sign Language is claimed to be the third most commonly used language in the United States. The statement in itself is enough to make it important for American Sign Language to be a highly taught language in the United States. On top of this, according to the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communications Diseases, about 2 to 3 of every 1,000 children in the U.S. are born with a detectable hearing deficit in one or both ears. This number may not seem to have a large impact on the need in this country for American Sign Language, but according to the same source, more than 90% of deaf children are born to deaf parents, and parents are currently the main resource for children to learn ASL. If a child is born to deaf parents, they won't be taught English as their first language. They'll be taught some form of American Sign Language instead. Considering this fact, American Sign Language would be greatly beneficial towards trying to bridge the language barrier between people who speak English and people who sign. Now that we've discussed the need for American Sign Language in the United States, let's discuss how American Sign Language classes are already somewhat included in schooling and why we should continue to increase these opportunities. One of the biggest reasons that people seem to not want to push more to include American Sign Language courses in schools today is that they think it will be too much of a hassle to change the curriculum, and that it won't be beneficial enough to warrant that hassle. In no uncertain terms, that thought process, while I do understand where it originates from, is almost completely wrong. While there would have to be some work done in order to add another set of classes to schools, it wouldn't be as difficult as many people think, especially in the areas around the country where there are already American Sign Language courses in schools. According to the National Association of the Deaf, about 40 states in the U.S. consider American Sign Language to be a language. American Sign Language should be considered a language in every state because it is called American Sign Language, but that's a discussion in itself. Even more importantly, American Sign Language is considered by many public schools and colleges to fulfill the foreign language requirements for their courses, according to the National Association of the Deaf. In fact, I have personal experience with this concept. I used my prior courses I took through South Piedmont Community College to count as my credits for WINGIT's foreign language requirement. Now that we've discussed how sign language classes are already somewhat included in schooling, which would make the transition to offering these classes easier, let's discuss how American Sign Language courses would affect the workforce. While there wouldn't necessarily be an immediate impact on the workforce if American Sign Language courses were offered in public schools, the overall impact would be very large. Through offering American Sign Language courses in public schools, there would be more people in the workforce who could communicate with those who need to sign in order to communicate effectively. I've had experience with this as well, as I was able to use the very little amount of American Sign Language I know at my job to communicate with a deaf person. The instant connection I felt with this person I had just met was incredible, and his face lit up like being able to communicate with more ease had just made his entire day. Teaching American Sign Language to children could also open more job opportunities to them, such as becoming an interpreter or even becoming an American Sign Language teacher themselves. Lastly, since we teach languages like Spanish and French that children may use later in life, we should also teach American Sign Language to the younger generations in the same way. Now that we've discussed how teaching American Sign Language to children could affect the workforce, let's review what we've discussed today. First, we discussed the need we have in the United States for American Sign Language. There's an entire community of Americans who rely on this language to be able to communicate, and as a country we need to do everything possible to help this group of people feel included. Next, we discussed how American Sign Language is already somewhat included in schooling, and how that would make the transition to implementing the courses to every public school easier. During the second point, we also discussed why the country should continue to further the availability of American Sign Language courses in all public schools. Lastly, we discussed how teaching children American Sign Language could positively impact the workforce in many ways, from giving the children an opportunity to connect with someone at a job that they wouldn't otherwise connect with, or even giving new job opportunities to the children later in life by choosing a job as someone like an interpreter or an American Sign Language teacher. I urge you to take the topic of implementing American Sign Language courses in all public schools very seriously, because it's a morally right thing to do, so that we as a country can take another step towards the inclusivity of all Americans. Just imagine the impact of spreading this language across the country could have on making connections with others that you normally couldn't communicate with without using American Sign Language.